Yosemite. The name alone suggests something elemental, raw, untamed, eternal. For more than a century, it has pulled wanderers westward into its granite sanctuary, where nature isn't manicured or managed but simply endures. Cliffs rise like cathedral walls, waterfalls roar into the silence, and monoliths like El Capitan and Half Dome loom with quiet authority. It's not just a national park, it's a reckoning. John Muir called it the grandest of all the special temples of nature. And even now, standing beneath Half Dome's cleaved granite face, you feel it, a kind of reverence, a hush that has nothing to do with silence. On one clear summer morning, a group of 9 entered this sacred space. Most were co-workers, desk-bound men chasing a weekend conquest. They weren't seasoned climbers or hardened explorers. But something had drawn them here, to Yosemite, to the mountain, to the edge of themselves. Tom Rice and Adrian Esteban were the spark, the initiators, colleagues, friends, and frequent companions on outdoor excursions. They'd decided to tackle the legendary Half Dome, a 16-mile round trip that begins in the relative calm of the valley and ends with hikers pulling themselves up the final granite slope with the aid of steel cables bolted into the rock. For some, it's a life-affirming challenge. For others, it becomes a harrowing flirtation with mortality. Esteban brought along another work friend, Bill Pippy, and his supervisor, Bob Frith, a transplanted New Englander new to California and still acclimating to the scale of Western wilderness. Frith, in turn, invited Bruce Weiner, a close friend also recently relocated from the East Coast. The party grew by association. Pippy recruited twin teenage brothers, Bruce and Brian Jordan, while another co-worker, Carl Buckner, brought along his longtime friend, Steve Elner. They were 9 in total, a loosely connected patchwork of office friendships and borrowed bravado. Most of them had never attempted anything like this before. Half Dome, in its imposing majesty, loomed not just as a destination, but as an existential question. Are you really who you think you are? At Camp Curry, they fueled up with cafeteria eggs, bacon, and pancakes, the kind of breakfast that feels earned even before the first step. Then came the ritualistic packing of gear: water bottles, energy bars, windbreakers, first aid kits. They tightened bootlaces with a seriousness born of anticipation and walked toward the unknown. Bruce Weiner, in particular, was quietly overwhelmed. It was his first time seeing Yosemite. The cliffs felt otherworldly, too immense to be real, like the backdrop to some overproduced IMAX film. The starkness of Half Dome struck him like a blow. From some angles, it looked like a wave of stone, frozen mid-crash. From others, it seemed almost delicate, balanced on the edge of permanence and collapse. Weiner doubted, silently, whether he belonged up there at all, but they went anyway, drawn forward not just by adrenaline or ego or the promise of a summit photo, but by that ancient, inexplicable pull that has led so many into the mountains, the hunger to be stripped down to your essentials and find, at the end of the trail, not just a view, but yourself. They didn't know it yet, but for some in that group, Yosemite would reveal far more than they bargained for. What started as a summer challenge would descend into one of the worst disasters in the park's storied history. And it began, as such stories often do, with clear skies and high spirits. It was a 2-mile march from Camp Curry to the trailhead at Happy Isles, the official start of the Half Dome ascent. The morning air was clean and dry, the sky a sharp blue, save for one cotton ball cumulus drifting overhead. Harmless, at first glance. By the time they reached Vernal Fall, That single cloud had gathered company. To the east, more were building, towering and darkening, stacking into the kind of formations backcountry hikers learn not to ignore. Still, the group pressed on. As the trail steepened, Buckner and Elner dropped back, falling nearly half an hour behind. Ahead of them, Rice, Esteban, Pippi, and the Jordan twins kept a brisk pace. Frith and Weiner arrived at the river above Nevada Fall around 12:30 p.m., sweat-soaked and flushed. To cool off, they stripped down and plunged into the icy water, laughing, shouting, and tossing obscenities like teenagers. For a brief moment, the mood was light, but above them, things were shifting. The cumulus clouds had thickened, now stacking high over Cloud's Rest, and thunder began to roll in from the east, a low, ominous growl. Rice, seasoned enough to know what those sounds meant, called his group together. They'd been moving fast and had made good time. If they pushed to the summit now, he reasoned, they could reach the shallow cave near the top and wait out whatever storm might come. It wasn't exactly safe, but it was something. Esteban echoed the sentiment. Get to the top, get inside, ride it out. Pippi and Bruce Jordan surged ahead, their pace sharpened by a mix of nerves and bravado. Both were in shape, competitive, and determined to beat the weather and each other to the summit. Not far behind, Rice and Esteban made a quick detour to a spring they considered their secret, a reliable source of cold water most tourists missed. Brian Jordan caught up with them there. Behind them, Frith and Weiner were beginning to suffer. Frith had insisted on carrying a massive 45-pound pack, and the weight was dragging both men down. They were dehydrated, overheated, and slipping further behind. Weiner's muscles began to cramp. He wanted to stop and rest, but Frith, sensing time running out, urged him on. Meanwhile, Pippi's sprint toward the summit hit a more primitive obstacle. He needed to defecate, fast. The race paused while he ducked off trail to find privacy. Jordan waited nearby, pacing. The rest of the group, Rice, Esteban, and Brian, was not far behind. As they climbed, two descending hikers stopped them. The message was simple and urgent. Don't go up. There's a storm coming. But instead of slowing them down, the warning seemed to push them harder. They could feel the summit getting closer, and that cave, whatever shelter it offered, was now a goal more than a precaution. Farther down, Buckner and Elner were slogging along at their own pace, well behind the others, but committed to finishing. The dark clouds above barely seemed to register. At 5:40 p.m., Esteban and Rice reached the base of the cables. By then, the sky had turned a dark gunmetal gray. Thunder cracked and echoed off the granite spires like distant artillery. Lightning licked across ridgelines, erratic and too close for comfort. A wooden sign stood near the base, half warning, half dare. Do not ascend the cables when lightning is present. Half domes broad, exposed back, is a magnet for electricity. The smooth granite, slick with sweat and fear, conducts lightning all too well. The steel cables, bolted into the rock, are no safer. Rice and Esteban looked up at the final climb, then back at the storm. The safe choice would be to turn around, but the summit was right there. The cave was right there. And so they moved on. Into the wind, into the static, into the storm. A lightning strike at higher elevation might have seemed more likely, but that logic betrayed a dangerous misunderstanding. On Half Dome, during a storm, electricity doesn't follow rules. It follows water. And when the granite turns slick with rain, the entire surface becomes a live wire. Esteban stared upward. The clouds had thickened, pulsing with light. A drop of water struck his cheek, then another. Drizzle. He knew what was coming. So did Rice. But they had faced storms before and survived. This one, they assumed, would be no different. Rice met Esteban's eyes. Something silent passed between them. A defiant grin. The kind you give to fate. "Screw it. This is our mountain. Let's just do it," Rice said. Esteban nodded, and that was that. The two men began the final ascent, clinging to the steel cables that rose like antennae into the storm. The summit, just 600 feet above, was barely visible now, shrouded in mist. The granite slickened underfoot. Rice led, Esteban close behind. Then, as if summoned by their presence, the sky fractured. A jagged web of lightning streaked above them, followed by a deep, bone-rattling rumble. Esteban felt a wave of dread, primal and unshakable. He turned to Rice and said simply, "Whatever happens, I want you to know I love you." Farther below, Brian Jordan had broken from the group and followed their path upward. 16 years old and eager to prove himself, he didn't hesitate. He wanted to be where the men were, doing what they did. Behind him, Frith and Weiner reached the subdome and paused. The warning sign stood in front of them, silent and insistent. Weiner looked up, wary. "Should we stop?" he asked. Frith shook his head. "There's a cave at the top," he said. "We'll be fine once we get there." Weiner didn't believe it, not fully, but his legs were cramping, and he feared stopping would make things worse. He was new here, new to California, new to this kind of risk. He didn't want to be the one who turned back. Above, Rice and Esteban crested the summit just after 6 p.m. The wind howled. Lightning danced on the ridges. The mountain was humming. They sprinted across the exposed rock toward the shallow cave, a gouge in the granite just deep enough to crouch in. "We made it," Rice yelled. They high-fived, elated. A moment later, they saw Brian Jordan standing on the summit, soaked and smiling. Esteban waved him in. Frith and Weiner arrived just behind him, drenched, exhausted, and euphoric. 5 men now huddled in the cave, soaked through, laughing and shouting over the roar of wind. "Bring on the lightning show," someone yelled. But the storm wasn't finished. Rain turned to ice. Hail pelted the rock. The cave offered little more than psychological shelter, a dent in a mountaintop that offered no true safety from the wrath of the sky. They tried to generate warmth, pressing close together, steam rising from their soaked clothes. Below, Bill Pippy and Bruce Jordan had made a different call. Bruce had looked up at the sky and said what none of the others had dared. "I'm scared." That was enough. Pippy, dehydrated and weakened from diarrhea, agreed to turn back. They pitched their tent at base camp and hunkered down as the storm gathered. Back at the summit, at 6:15 p.m., the cave began to glow with electric tracers, eerie blue light that flickered across the stone like ghost fire. Then it happened. A bolt of lightning struck the dome. The cave exploded with light and sound. It wasn't a crack or a flash. It was a detonation, a blinding concussion of energy. The air turned white. Rock vibrated. Esteban was hurled backward. His body slammed against the wall like a rag doll. He screamed, but heard nothing. The world had gone silent. He couldn't move, couldn't feel. The current had entered his body through his back. Because he'd been resting lightly against the rock, the charge had traveled only through the left side of his body. It may have saved his life. Weiner had been bent over, adjusting a bootlace. Only his rear and thighs had touched the wall. He didn't get the full surge, but his legs were gone, number useless. He moaned. barely conscious but more coherent than the others. Around them, the cave fell into chaos. Weiner turned his head, eyes wide with shock, and saw Brian Jordan sitting nearby. Vacant, lost in a silent, hollow stare. "We've got to get out of here," Weiner muttered, voice trembling. His gaze swept the cave. Rice was slumped sideways against the granite, curled in on himself, body convulsing uncontrollably. His legs, bare and exposed, were charred black, his blonde hair singed to ash. Esteban blinked awake, disoriented, and turned to Brian Jordan, who was slumped forward, the acrid smell of burning flesh clinging to him. Jordan looked lifeless, just a shell. A sick clarity hit Esteban. Between himself and Rice, they dragged everyone into danger. Behind them, Frith was violently vomiting froth, a gurgling sound bubbling from his throat. His eyes rolled back, the whites stark against the dark cave. A deep gash cut across his forehead, like a white-hot dagger had been driven into his skull. His body jerked wildly, threatening to topple off the cliff's edge. Esteban lunged, grabbing Frith's waistband just in time, yanking him back from the precipice. But the convulsions didn't stop. Frith thrashed and twisted as if pulled by some unseen force toward the void beyond. Esteban strained with every muscle, yelling for help. Weiner, barely able to move from the waist down, managed to grasp Frith's sweater. Together they fought to hold him, but their paralysis made the effort almost futile. The violent shaking dragged them dangerously close to the edge. Frith's convulsions pulled Weiner nearer and nearer. Horror carved a deeper line in their faces. With a final, agonized shudder, Esteban had no choice but to let go. Frith slipped. He disappeared over the 2,200-foot drop, the void swallowing him whole. Weiner's scream ripped through the air. His body shook uncontrollably as sobs racked him. A man crushed by loss. Esteban's gaze shifted to Rice. The man's left leg was twisted unnaturally beneath a dislodged boulder. Rice made guttural, incoherent sounds, gagging on regurgitated food. Esteban cleared his throat and shook him desperately. But Rice was fading fast. Severe burns smoked on Rice's legs, raw flesh exposed and charring. Outside, the storm raged. Electric crackles echoed like war drums. Esteban's heart hammered. "Weiner, we've got to get out of here," he screamed. Weiner tried to stand, but collapsed immediately. Fear gripped Esteban. Mortal peril wasn't abstract anymore. It was immediate, palpable. All he could think about was escape. Summoning every ounce of upper body strength, Esteban crawled toward the cave's entrance and onto the summit. Ahead lay a crevice, the outhouse, a small depression about 150 feet away. Crawling frantically, Esteban reached it and collapsed, tears mingling with shrill laughter. He was alive. For now, that was enough. Back in the cave, Weiner sat frozen, shaken to the core. His leg was useless. Climbing down the cables like this was impossible. He didn't want to be the mountain's lightning rod. He prayed no more strikes would come. But the air buzzed with electrical charge. Suddenly, another blast rocked the granite, tearing through the cave. Weiner felt himself lift, an out-of-body experience, watching his own convulsions before sinking into a strange, agonizing calm. Pain exploded in his chest. His shirt clung to his skin, melted and burnt. Every movement sent searing agony through his legs. His left hiking boot had been blown off completely. Rice slowly stirred, consciousness returning in jolts, as if the strike had rebooted his brain. He screamed in pain beneath the weight of Weiner's body. His other leg lay bent grotesquely beneath a rock. Weiner rolled off Rice, gasping for breath. Nearby, Brian Jordan sat slumped, his face a sickly blue, body limp. Weiner yelled for help, panic rising as the storm's thunder faded to distant rumblings. In this part of Yosemite, the worst had passed. Believing the danger was over, Esteban crawled from the crevice, heading back toward the cave. At the ridge near the cables, he spotted someone approaching, a lone figure silhouetted against the storm-dark sky. Waving desperately, he caught the attention of Mike Hook, a trained EMT. Hook entered the cave and was immediately hit by the stench of burnt flesh and hair. He rushed to Brian Jordan first. No pulse. Dead. Hook moved to Rice and Weiner, who both moaned and writhed in agony. Esteban, now able to move his legs again, joined to help. Rice spotted him and shouted, "Adrian, get your ass in here. Don't leave me like Hogan." Together, they carried the two injured men out onto the open granite, where the others soon arrived. Linda Cozier, an EMT trainer, took charge, calm and focused. Hogue, a long-distance runner in their group, volunteered to run for help. With the storm past, Pippi and Bruce Jordan, ready to climb, arrived at the cables. They repacked their gear and prepared to ascend when a panicked hiker dashed down. Lightning hit someone up top. "I'm going for help." Pippi initially refused to believe anyone from their group was hurt. "I just blocked it out," he later said. Further up, they met another hiker rushing down. 2 guys got killed, and 1 was a kid. Those words stunned Pippi and Bruce Jordan. The possibility that Bruce's brother might be among the dead weighed heavy on them. They climbed on in silence, dread settling over every step. At the summit, they saw Rice. He yelled, "The kid's dead! Frith fell off the edge." Buckner couldn't take it. He retreated to base camp. At 9:30 p.m., Mike Hook reached a ranger station and reported the disaster. Rangers quickly packed and set out on foot. Flying was impossible at first, the night too dark and dangerous. But by 11 p.m., a sliver of moonlight broke through, and a helicopter was dispatched from Modesto. When the Rangers reached the summit, Linda briefed them. Together, they searched for a landing zone, marking it with flashlights. Just past midnight, the helicopter's rotors grew louder, slicing through the still night air. Only 1 patient could be evacuated at a time. Weiner, most severely injured, went first. By 1:15 a.m., Rice was flown down. Esteban followed on foot, needing no stretcher. Both Rice and Weiner required specialized care at UC Davis Medical Center. Back on the summit, the survivors were spent. Physically, mentally, emotionally. Yet there was a tight bond between them and those who'd helped. Pippi, Bruce Jordan, Esteban, Rice, Linda Cozier, and Mike Hook. At dawn, a Yosemite helicopter lifted off to recover the bodies of Bob Frith and Brian Jordan. They located Frith's body at the base and returned to the summit for Brian's remains. Bruce boarded the helicopter with his brother's body, shattered. Pippi descended to meet Buckner and Elner at their campsite. The 3 trudged down together. At the ranger station, Bruce and Brian's parents waited. Seeing them broke Pippi anew, tears streaming as he crumbled under the weight of grief. Mr. Jordan's efforts to comfort Bill Pippi helped him through some of his grief. Unaware of the exact circumstances behind the tragedy, the Jordans blamed Yosemite officials for allowing hikers to attempt Half Dome despite hazardous weather warnings. Linda Crozier and Brian Cage, members of the rescue party, gave detailed statements to park rangers. Cage recalled, "That's when it really hit me. As much as this was an accident caused by a mix of nature's fury and poor human judgment, there was still a looming wrongful death lawsuit against Yosemite. The ranger warned them that a lawsuit could drain the park's entire budget for maintaining access to Half Dome and other backcountry areas. Cage made it clear to the ranger that they were ready to testify the 5 men in the cave had acted recklessly, a point Esteban himself admitted. Based on this, the Jordans were advised against pursuing legal action, as it would likely be dismissed. Esteban wrestled deeply with guilt. His and Rice's decisions had contributed to 2 deaths and 2 critical injuries. On top of that, Rice accused him of abandoning him during the storm. Esteban explained, "The dilemma I faced was whether to do all I could to save someone else, even if it meant possibly dying myself, or to save myself and let someone else possibly die." Escaping the cave with no major injuries, Esteban was grateful but overwhelmed by guilt. He sank into a deep depression, haunted by nightmares of Frith falling off the edge. Tom Rice and Bruce Weiner were hospitalized at UC Davis Medical Center in critical condition. Bruce spent around 3 weeks there before being transferred to a Boston hospital burn unit. He suffered major kidney damage and required numerous skin grafts. Tragically, many grafts became infected and had to be removed and replaced, a process he said was worse than the lightning strike itself. Bruce lost over 70 pounds during his recovery, much of it muscle. He had to rebuild his strength just to walk properly again. To this day, he still suffers permanent nerve damage and ongoing kidney problems. The lightning strike has even affected his ability to urinate normally. Reflecting on the event over 30 years later, Weiner expressed gratitude for those who rescued and cared for them. They didn't know us. They just stepped up and stayed with us for hours until the helicopter arrived. I'll always be very grateful. But he was also critical of the group's leadership. It was reckless and irresponsible for experienced leaders like Rice and Esteban to tell outdoor rookies like me and Frith that there was a safe haven on the summit during a lightning storm. In reality, it was the worst place we could have been, like standing on top of the mountain holding a giant lightning rod. He acknowledged his own role as well, admitting that peer pressure and his own inexperience had pushed him into danger. I should have looked out for myself. Ultimately, we made the decision, and no one held a gun to our heads. Tom Rice spent weeks in the ICU with severe leg burns. He resented Esteban for escaping without injuries and accused him of abandoning the group, which led to a bitter fallout. Esteban left in frustration. Linda Crozier, who had led medical efforts on the summit, visited Rice many times during his hospital stay. Rice made a full recovery months later. The following summer, Esteban, Rice, and Pippi returned to the Half Dome summit. "We had to prove to ourselves we could do this," Rice said. Esteban returned many times in subsequent years, using the mountain as a measure of his physical and mental strength. The rock shelter where the tragedy unfolded became a solemn, sacred space. Esteban and the others never disturbed it again. Thanks for watching this intense story of survival and tragedy on Half Dome. If you like this story, please like and subscribe for more. Stay safe and see you next time.